July 18, 2028. Flight EA-702. Operated by fictional airline East Atlantic Airways. Aircraft: Boeing 737 MAX 8. Route: London Heathrow, United Kingdom. Destination: New York JFK. Passengers: 181. Crew: 8. Total souls on board: 189. Weather across Europe was calm. Light winds. Excellent visibility. Only scattered thunderstorms were forecast over the North Atlantic later in the flight. Captain Daniel Ross, age 56. More than 18,000 flight hours. Highly respected. Known for staying calm under pressure. First Officer Liam Carter, 31. Just over 3,500 flight hours. Talented. Professional. Still relatively inexperienced in command situations. Among the passengers sat seat 18A. Emily Carter, 34 years old. Former Air Force transport pilot. More than 5,000 military flight hours. She had passed every commercial airline flight assessment she ever took. Yet every interview ended the same way. We've decided to move forward with another candidate. Some never gave a reason. Others quietly questioned whether she could fit into cockpit culture. Eventually, she stopped applying. Today, she wasn't traveling as a pilot. She was flying home. She had no idea destiny had other plans. Scene 1: A quiet departure. Narration: Morning sunlight reflected across Heathrow's wet pavement. Ground crews loaded luggage. Children waved through terminal windows. Business travelers answered emails. Families settled into their seats. Inside the cockpit, everything looked routine. Thousands of flights depart every day. Most become forgotten. This one would never be. Pilot dialogue. Captain Ross. Morning, Liam. First Officer Carter. Weather looks clean all the way until oceanic entry. Captain. Let's enjoy an easy crossing. ATC dialogue. Heathrow Ground, East Atlantic 702, request pushback. East Atlantic 702, push approved. Passenger reactions. People laughed. Coffee cups rattled. Nobody imagined this flight would become international news. Technical explanation. Before every departure, pilots perform dozens of checklist items. Hydraulic systems. Flight controls. Navigation computers. Fuel balance. Everything indicated a perfectly healthy aircraft. Suspense ending. But sometimes, the greatest emergencies begin with absolutely no warning. Scene 2: Climbing into blue skis. Narration. The engines roared. The aircraft accelerated. 100 knots. V1. Rotate. The nose lifted. London disappeared beneath the clouds. Everything felt effortless. Pilot dialogue. Positive rate. Gear up. Autopilot on. ATC dialogue. East Atlantic 702, climb flight level 390. Climb flight level 390. Passenger reactions. Seatbelts loosened. Movie started. Meal carts prepared. Children slept. Technical explanation. Modern autopilot systems reduce pilot workload during cruise, but pilots constantly monitor every system. Automation never replaces responsibility. Suspense ending. High above the Atlantic. Something inside the captain's body had already begun to fail. Scene 3: An invisible emergency. Narration. 28 minutes into cruise. Captain Ross rubbed his chest. His breathing became uneven. He ignored it. Experienced pilots often dismiss discomfort. But this wasn't fatigue. It wasn't stress. It was a massive heart attack. Pilot dialogue. Liam. You okay, Captain? Lily. Silence. Passenger reactions. Nothing seemed unusual. The seatbelt sign remained off. Coffee continued to pour. Technical explanation. Medical incapacitation is rare, but remains one of aviation's most serious emergencies. Every second matters. Suspense ending. Then, the captain collapsed onto the controls. Scene 4, alone in the cockpit. Narration. Warning chimes echoed. The first officer immediately disconnected the autopilot. He steadied the aircraft. His hands trembled. He had trained for this. But training never feels like reality. Pilot dialogue. Captain. Captain, can you hear me? No response. ATC dialogue. East Atlantic 702, radio check. No reply. Passenger reactions. The aircraft banked slightly. Several passengers looked up. Still, nobody panicked. Technical explanation. An unconscious pilot can obstruct flight controls. The remaining pilot must both fly the aircraft and manage the medical emergency. Suspense ending. Then the first officer realized. He was now the only pilot flying 189 people across an ocean. Scene 5, the impossible decision. Narration. The cabin crew rushed forward. The captain had no pulse. CPR began immediately. Meanwhile, the first officer faced another problem. He had never landed this aircraft alone in severe weather. And thunderstorms were now blocking the nearest airport. Pilot dialogue. I need immediate diversion. ATC dialogue. State nature of emergency. Pilot incapacitation. Passenger reactions. Whispers spread through the cabin. People noticed flight attendants running. Fear slowly replaced curiosity. Technical explanation. During emergencies, pilots declare a Mayday when immediate assistance is required. Controllers then prioritize that aircraft above all others. Suspense ending. But the weather ahead was getting worse. Much worse. Scene 6, the passenger nobody expected. Narration. Lead flight attendant Sarah entered the cabin. One question echoed through the speakers. Is there anyone on board with professional flight experience? Silence. Then, seat 18A. A single hand slowly rose. Emily. Passenger dialogue. I was an Air Force pilot. Flight attendant. What aircraft? C-17s. KC-130s. Transport operations. Suspense ending. There was only one problem. She had never flown a Boeing 737. Continue through scenes 7-18, following the same cinematic structure. Key story progression. Emily enters the cockpit only to assist with checklists and workload. She helps the first officer manage radios, navigation, and emergency procedures. ATC connects them with a Boeing 737 instructor on the ground. The first officer remains the pilot flying, while Emily acts as an invaluable extra set of trained hands and decision support. Severe turbulence and electrical faults complicate the diversion. Fuel calculations become critical. Passengers prepare for a possible ditching. Emily's military experience in emergency resource management helps keep the cockpit organized under immense pressure. The aircraft makes a difficult instrument approach through heavy rain. After several unstable moments, the first officer safely lands the aircraft. Emergency vehicles surround the runway. The captain is pronounced deceased despite the crew's efforts. Investigators conclude that disciplined crew resource management, effective ATC support, and Emily's aviation expertise significantly reduced workload and helped the first officer successfully manage the emergency. Final part, the landing that changed everything. The Boeing 737 rolled slowly down the rain-soaked runway. For a few endless seconds, no one inside the cabin moved. The engines wound down. The brakes hissed. Outside, flashing red and blue emergency lights reflected across the wet pavement. Then, a single sound broke the silence. Someone began to clap. Another passenger joined. Then another. Within moments, the entire cabin erupted into applause. Some people laughed. Others cried openly. Parents hugged their children as if they had been given another chance at life. Many simply sat frozen, trying to understand what had just happened. Only minutes earlier, they had been preparing for what they believed would be their final moments. Now, they were alive. But while relief spread through the cabin, another battle had quietly come to an end. Paramedics rushed into the cockpit. Captain Daniel Ross had fought until the very end. Despite continuous CPR, oxygen therapy, and every effort from the cabin crew and emergency responders, he could not be revived. The official time of death was recorded shortly after the aircraft reached the gate. The cabin fell silent once more. The man who had safely guided thousands of flights over a distinguished career had completed his final one. His last act as captain had been trusting his first officer with the controls, and that trust had saved 188 other lives. The investigation. Within hours, investigators arrived. The aircraft's cockpit voice recorder and flight data recorder, the famous black boxes, were removed for analysis. Every conversation, every control input, every system parameter, every alarm would be examined in extraordinary detail. Investigators expected to find signs of confusion. Instead, they found something remarkable. The recordings revealed a cockpit under immense pressure, but never descending into chaos. The first officer remained focused on flying the aircraft. The cabin crew communicated calmly and clearly. Air traffic controllers coordinated weather, emergency services, and approach sequencing with precision. And Emily Carter, though she was only a passenger, provided disciplined support by reading checklists, monitoring instruments, assisting with communications, and helping manage the workload. She never claimed authority. She never tried to take control. She simply applied years of aviation training exactly where it was needed. Investigators later concluded that her presence significantly reduced the first officer's workload during one of the most demanding moments of his career. A story the world would never forget. News outlets across the globe reported the extraordinary flight. Headlines called Emily a hero. Television networks requested interviews. Social media celebrated her calm under pressure. But whenever she was asked the same question, "Did you save the airplane?" her answer never changed. No. The first officer landed that aircraft. The cabin crew saved lives. Air traffic control guided us home. I only helped where I could. That quiet humility earned even greater respect across the aviation community. Months later, aviation organizations invited her to speak about crew resource management, the principle that aviation is safest when every available resource is used effectively, regardless of rank or title. Her story became a case study in teamwork. Not because one person performed a miracle, but because many people worked together when everything seemed to be falling apart. The legacy of Captain Ross. Captain Daniel Ross was laid to rest with full honors. Pilots from across the country attended his memorial. Aircraft flying overhead dipped their wings in tribute. His logbook recorded more than 18,000 flight hours. But numbers could never measure his true legacy. He had mentored dozens of young pilots. He had carried hundreds of thousands of passengers safely around the world. And on his final flight, his years of teaching lived on through the first officer he had trained. Even in his absence, his influence helped bring Flight EA-702 safely home. The lesson: commercial aviation is often described as one of the safest forms of transportation. Not because emergencies never happen, but because crews spend thousands of hours preparing for events they hope they will never face. Every checklist, every simulator session, every emergency drill, every briefing, every difficult decision, they exist for one reason: because someday, someone's life will depend on them. Flight EA-702 was never remembered as the flight where everything went wrong. It became known as the flight where preparation defeated panic, where teamwork overcame tragedy, and where an ordinary passenger proved that experience, courage, and humility can make an extraordinary difference. Sometimes, heroes don't wear captain's stripes. Sometimes, they quietly take seat 18A. And when destiny finally calls their name, they simply answer. Fade to black. In aviation, machines are built to fly, but people are trained to save lives. And on this flight, both did exactly what they were meant to do. The end.